Well, Della, hi. Thank you so much for joining me and for being willing to share John's story, share your testimony about what it was like to be involved with Into Light Project. And I think really to get started, I'd love to just have you take an opportunity to just say a few words about your son, John, and yeah, for anybody that might be watching.
Well, John was 46. He was a Marine and he had gotten out after his time was done, and he wanted to build swimming pools. That's what he had learned to do.
Mm.
And then he decided this is a lot, so I'm going to go back in the Marines. He wanted to get his time built up, get his pension, whatnot. And they told him he was 2 years over their age limit. So he went down to the National Guard office and talked to them. And anyway, he was with the National Guard for almost 10 years till the day he passed. And when they came to see me, his officers and that, and came to the service for him, they talked about him, how he was so dependable, accountable. He volunteered for more things than anybody had ever, and things that I didn't know. And I mean, I knew he was a good soldier. I'd heard it from others, but anyway, he suffered from PTSD. And I found that out the hard way. He was living with me, and he walked in on him, and he was trying to commit suicide.
Oh my God.
So I freaked out. I Baker acted him. I didn't know what else to do. Right. It was at night, and I didn't know who to call, what to do. Anyway, long story, got the VA involved, suicide hotline, and they got John in for help. Well, they did help him for a minute. I say they put a Band-Aid on it because they basically gave him a bunch of meds and sent him home. And John didn't want to stay on the medication, and I've learned this now the hard way as well, that most of these people don't want to be on medication. They don't want people to know they have a problem. It's not manly. He's a Marine. He's a soldier. He's got an image to uphold, and God bless him. But a guy that was working for John, he was a little laborer, gave John something for pain because John suffered from back pain. He had been in a car wreck, and actually, I say that's where the addiction thing started. He was on pain medication for the car wreck, and he just had that addiction personality, I guess.
Sure.
And so this guy gave it to him. He was right next door to where I used to live, at a neighbor's, and they were supposed to be having a drink together. And at 2:30 in the morning, I wake up and John's not home. And John, I was so angry, and he never came home. And I found out my other son is a police officer in Apopka, and the girl that's the dispatcher there called my daughter-in-law because it came across that he was being transported. She saw the name, and anyway, a nightmare began. Yeah. But John was just always a fun kid. He loved everything outdoors. He skateboarded into his 40s. I remember going with him to a skate park, and there was a little boy that was watching him and just mesmerized. And so when John finished his little run there, called him over and I said, take this little guy and show him a couple of things.
That's cool.
And he did. And they were just blown away because I was standing with the dad and talking to him, and they were talking about John. And I said, well, that's my son. So anyway, he was just fun. He surfed, he hunted, he fished, he did all that guy stuff.
Yeah.
And when he stopped doing it, I would say John, you're off work today. Why don't you go fishing? Or why aren't you, I just knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
That wasn't my John. And then I gradually started paying more attention, and I heard him sick, throwing up from them, trying not to do it.
Right.
And I found this out later on, that that's part of that. And him and my neighbor were doing this together. And my neighbor and I saved him like 4 times after John died. And he's now almost 4 years clean. But he had 2 autistic children, and I kept on him about it, and I called the police on him. I called and I said, you're not going to do this on my watch. I'm not going to live next door and see you doing this. And anyway, he's shared some things with me about him and John and how long they'd been doing it. And I was pretty right on with it, noticing the changes in him. And it made a monster out of my son. I mean, the way he talked to me, demeaning and just nasty. I kept saying, that's not my son. What's going on? So when this happened, I tell people, they're like, well, how can you talk about this like you do? How do you share your story about John? And a lot of times I don't cry. Like right now, I probably could if I allowed myself. But to me, it's helping other people understand when they have a problem like that. Because I started going to Naranon after that. One of my other moms that lost her son held Naranon meetings. And I said, oh, I wish I had known about that when John was going through his mess.
Oh yeah.
But not knowing, you just don't, you don't know.
So you were going through all that without any support.
But I tell people, like in the groups and that, and I started a support group. I guess you may know that, because I was going to Grief Share, and I found people looked at us different. It wasn't like my kid died from cancer or a car wreck. It was drugs, like what kind of mom was I? So I started a support group so that parents had a place to go and talk about their kids without being judged. And it's called Advocates for Our Angels, and we're still going. We do a Facebook and in-person meetings. Right now it's kind of slacked off. People, after COVID, it got a little different. But we do still meet, and we'll get together and have lunches and stuff like that. But just trying to be able to open up. And I work with Sheriff Lima's office with the overdose as well. I get a list of names ever so often. They'll catch me up on who has passed, like the last 2 or 3 months. And I'll send a letter out to the parents or the family, whoever is, next to kin. But that helped. But just being able to share my story, I think, has helped me heal.
Yeah.
And I just, I can't say enough about Into Light, what they did and how I even got involved. I told Teresa, I don't remember how we got connected, but when I got with her and then a lot of the other mothers that joined in, when we went downtown to that historical museum where she held it at, the first night it was just the families. And when we walked in, we had no idea what we were going to come up against or, see or hear, but it was so quiet. You could hear a pin drop, and then you heard crying. Yeah.
It's interesting because the Delaware exhibit was my first experience with Into Light, and that was open to the public, and there was like 700 people, and it was there was people weren't wanting to actually stay long enough to read the narratives because there were just so many people trying to get through there. So the stories I'm hearing a lot from parents or just family members, it's not always parents, that had a loved one in that exhibit, is that it was the return visits where
Right.
they really experienced what you experienced in Florida.
Took it in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I went several times. I would have gone every day if I could.
I hear that a lot.
But I took a friend of mine who knew my sons, both of them. He had worked with them building swimming pools when they were just kids, teenagers. And then on into their adult life, he knew them, of course, but he's a real good friend of mine. And he had had some surgery, so I invited him to go. And I just watched him, and he would go from one station to the next, just reading and looking. And he just looked at me, he said, "You know what I get? What I see here? They were all so much alike. Personality, their flares for life, interests kind of thing." It was pretty amazing. And I was so thankful to get to meet Teresa and Barbara. Teresa, I thought she was probably going to kick me out of the club because every time I'd send her a picture, it was too dark or not enough light, and
it's so hard. That leads me to the next part is the application of the submission process. And I'd love for you to speak to that, because I do think that that's something that the organization comes up against still, is people just being unsure of what that process is going to be like, and for me, it's important to always mention in these videos that, the only people that ever see that submission form that is really, there's a lot of information on it, is Teresa and Barbara, who's her right arm, and then an artist like myself and the narrative writer. And then that's it. We're not some big company where it's getting, bounced around to a bunch of people. But I'd love to hear your experience of what it was like, just going through that process.
Once I got hooked up with her, besides being confused how I got involved with her, I was thankful. I'm always thankful anybody that will take their time and listen to our stories and make something out of it. But she was always Teresa, because I never really dealt with Barbara till later. But Teresa, with the pictures that I would send, she was always so kind and really gentle with me. And then I find out her son, Devin, had died about 3 weeks from John. So we had that connection. But she just was really patient with me. And like I said, the pictures that I would send, there would be a little discrepancy, too dark or too something. And I thought, oh God, she's just going to tell me, forget it. But she didn't. And we finally got a picture. Can I show it to you? Yeah. Look at his eyes.
Oh, yeah.
And when she did the first one, I said, oh God, you're going to hate me. I said, there's something, it's great. And it's a really good catch on it. But I said, I'm not fond of the mustache, but he did have one. So I said, there's something missing in his eyes. She went back. She didn't say anything. She just went back and she did another, and she sent it to me. She goes, what do you think about this? I cried. I said, you did it. I said, that little sparkle in his eyes since John was a baby. My mom worked at Orlando Country Club, and she loved her grandbabies. Well, she always said, everybody says, that one's got the devil in him. He's got the twinkle in his eye. And they were right. He was my mischievous child, but he was also the loving, very loving guy, and cared much about his family. So Teresa finally caught that, and we were very happy about it.
Yeah. Well, what about working with the whomever helped you with the narrative process? What was that like, working with the writer?
It was fairly easy because I had had a chance to share John's story. So we kind of went along with the format and I plugged it in and she did a beautiful job. She didn't really change a whole lot that I had said. She got a lot of his personality in the story. I felt like they really made people see they were people.
It's a fantastic narrative. I mean, it's one of my favorites. I especially love that, you tell the story about how someone came up to you after the funeral and talked about that brief interaction they had, sharing a beer and fishing, and how that person had been contemplating suicide and what John said saved his life. It's amazing the ripples that you find out after somebody passes, the impact that they've had. I hear that from every single loved one that I speak to, every family member that I speak to about their loved one is these stories that they're hearing afterwards.
Stories that come up.
This incredible impact that, to a T, I guarantee you, every single one of these, whatever, that had no idea that they had that impact.
Right.
And that's such, it's so sad. It's just terrible. And
there's a little guy that got in touch with me, and I want to go see him. He's in North Carolina at Cherry Point. He was stationed with John, and he was from West Virginia. There's a video I share of John on Facebook ever so often because it's the only thing I have that has his voice. And he was cleaning a fish. And these little boys are around him, friends of his. And he's explaining to this old guy about the fish and how they caught and blah, blah, blah. And he says, yeah, my buddy, I was in the Marine Corps with, he's from West Virginia. And he said, he told me up there they'd find catfish in the rivers as big as Volkswagen. Well, when that guy called me, he had got in touch with me on Messenger, and I said, please call me and we can talk, because I didn't want to say what happened like that. And we spent over an hour on the phone, and he said, well, in that video, the hillbilly he's talking about, that's me.
That's cool.
And he says, John used to take me out trying to teach me to surf. And he said, I'd get on the board and I'd try to stand up and I'd fall off. And John says, I guess hillbillies don't surf. So it was always kind of a joke. But anyway, yeah, little stories that come back to me and friends of his that stay in touch with me. It's very amazing.
Well, I love that you shared your experience not being 100% pleased with the portrait the first time, because that's such a huge part of the process. I am I do the social media. I volunteer to do the social media for the organization, but my main gig with Intellite is as an artist, and so I get this opportunity to try and capture, these people.
So you're actually doing the portraits too?
I do the portraits. I've done I've done about 40 portraits so far for the organization.
Oh wow!
In different states. I started in Delaware, and then I've continued on. And that's always, honestly, one of my favorite parts is because I actually say right off the top, my first communications when I'm about to start, that all I have is a photograph, and I'm speaking with someone that knew them their entire lives. Yeah. And that I'm going to be relying on them to give me feedback, because sometimes even if I totally capture the photograph, something might be missing or something might not be right. And I urge them, I say, please, the best portraits I do are always when I have a family that gives me that feedback, that lets me know something's not right. I've done 15 modifications on a portrait, and I do the same thing Teresa did. There's never complaint. There's never pushback. You just do it. You just do it because obviously the families know more than anybody.
Right.
Right. And that's that reaction you had where you cried and you saw them. I'll keep editing it. I'll keep modifying it until that happens. It doesn't matter. And I'm clear about that from the get-go. And it's an unbelievable experience. I've done a lot of artwork through my life. I went to college for art, it's really there's nothing like this, period. And
No.
I'm also in recovery. I am an addict and an
Okay.
alcoholic, and I've been in recovery for 5 years.
And
And
thank you for sharing that.
yeah,
That's sweet.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
this work and doing the social media, speaking with people like you, it's become such an incredibly important part of my own recovery work. You know, like you said, you're the person that you brought to the gallery who was going, you know, person to person and
Mhm.
seeing these similarities. I tell you, every single time I read a narrative, I see so many similarities between my personality and the personality that's coming through in these submission forms. It's there, but by the grace of God go I. You know, I am
There you
so
go.
fortunate to be here and so grateful to be a part of this. I think Teresa is one of the most amazing people on the
Yeah,
planet.
absolutely.
To
And I
have
sure hope
started this, man,
I
it's
hope they get
unbelievable.
to bring it back to Florida. She had said they were trying to
Mhm.
do it again here. And even if it's not in Orlando, but I think that's what she was talking about, trying to go back in the museum here.
Yeah,
And a lot of people that didn't get a chance to see it or whatever, but um, it was just amazing. And I
yeah,
don't know how many people actually came to the museum, other than the families. I know it was probably a lot, but I
yeah.
wish there was a way to bring it back.
Yeah, well, I hear that all the time too, and I also answer a lot of messages on social media from families that just learned about it after the fact and ask if there's going to be another one because they want to submit their loved one, and it's
Right.
there's this is it's I am so inspired every time I talk to someone like yourself who lost you know so much and are in turn look at you with your this hair and the shirt and you're going out and you are handing out Narcan and you're doing these things that you are saving lives, you are reducing the stigma, you are talking to people and you are inspiring them to be able to then talk about it in response. And I think that I'm so grateful as someone in recovery. I'm so grateful for you and for what you
I
do.
really feel like it, like I said before, I think it helps me heal,
Mhm.
being able to share, but at the same time, educate.
Yeah.
This is such a big necessity. I'm still shocked today when I talk to people and they don't know what fentanyl is. I mean, I had a lady over here at my pool one day. It's been a little while because it's winter now, but she she goes, "What's fentanyl?" And I just looked at her and she had a little one in the pool. And I said, I don't know if you don't watch the news or you don't get out much or whatever, but you need to be aware because
Yeah.
this is very, and it's killing more younger people. John was 46, and
Sure.
I had a conversation yesterday with another mother, and she was talking about her daughter was 19,
Yeah.
and she's also into the light program,
Yeah.
Nancy Ackerman, and her daughter was left at the hospital door and the guy left. And anyway, she said, I'm just so shocked at how much younger the kids are today that it's getting a hold of. And I said, they order it online,
Right.
the
Yep.
pills.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I know that that's why Barbara and Teresa, instead of just talking about this being a program, that is wanting to memorialize and honor uh, people that have died from addiction, they've also added now the term people that have died from drug poisoning because fentanyl doesn't give you there's no room for experimentation. It's one
Like
and
my
done.
shirt says, no
Hey, it's
second
one, no
chance.
second chance. And you're right. I mean, I changed the profile picture fairly regularly for into light and feature a different portrait and a story. And I just the last one, the one that's currently up there now, he's a 15-year-old kid. He's a 15-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And it's just,
There's a therapist that's on, I saw her on Dr. Phil, and her son was, I think, 13. He had ordered online thinking he was getting like Percocet or something
Yeah.
like that. And it was fentanyl. And some people were like, oh, it takes somebody that, some status like that to get noticed. I go, no, it takes us to
Right.
get out there and run our mouth and talk about this because it's real.
Yeah.
My other two wish that I would slack off a little bit and not do so much, but I don't know how.
Good.
I'm in it so good now. I just don't even know how I would slow down.
Mm.
So I just keep doing what I do.
Well, thank you so much for doing
You bet.
Well, I think we went into my questions and more. So I'm going to stop recording, but let's keep chatting right now. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Della.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
so much for everything you're doing and for taking the time.
Anytime. I appreciate it.